do the opening karakia.
Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki wahu, tuia ki roto, tuia te here tangata, ka ronga te pau, ka ronga te ao, umi e, hui e, prae ki e.
Thank you, Alec. And it's good noting Councillor Stallard use the microphones. I'm not sure if we do have anyone on Zoom or not. Not yet anyway. So with that, we'll move to apologies, and I think we're all here. It does appear now, just for clarification, Alec, the iwi seat is now vacant because...
It is indeed, and we're working through the process of reappointment. And I don't know how long that's going to take, but we have started.
Thank you. So we'll move on to 2, confirmation of order of business. No change from me, Nathan, so that's all good. Public forum, there's no public forum. Confirmation of minutes of 16th of August 24, pages 1 to 10. Is someone of a mind to move those minutes? Move Councillor Stallard, seconded Councillor Walker. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against, resolution is carried. Thank you. And then we'll move to public forum. No public forum. Oh, sorry, no. God. I saw the confirmation. Apologies. So now we move on to Nelson Tasman Regional Landfill Business Unit General Manager's Update Report, November 24. Nathan.
Through the chair, thank you.
Pages 11 to 24, councillors.
The first 3 months of the running of the landfill with the new contract has actually been really good. So I mean, I don't sing praises very well, but they've been doing a great job. So I'm very happy. So it's been very smooth. The temporary transfer facility that we've got installed has been running that whole time, and customers are very happy. That's reduced the turnaround time, as we've talked about in the past. And so overall environmental effects have been reduced. We're less mud on the road, less litter, those sorts of things around the site. So that, again, great outcomes. During the period, we had to establish the tone of back beach sawdust. So that was quite a large cost that we accrued during the period, which we, at the time of this report, we had not got income for. So at the time of this report, at the end of September, we're in deficit, greater than we were expecting. In the October and November periods, the interim information suggests we're now into surplus, for the business, because of the income that's come in from the back beach sawdust. So while this says we're in a negative position, more negative than budget, we are now currently, after this period, in a more positive than budget position. From a health and safety perspective, it's been running well. There's been no notable instances. Obviously, there's been a lot of little incidences. There's quite a lot of observations that were going on, which is great to see, because those are the things we really want, seeing hazards and fixing them before they become a potential issue. We've had 7 battery ignition events during the period, so that was higher than we've seen in a wee while, but still lower than we historically saw. And there's been a number of situations where the contractor's actually gone out and done some fixes to stuff, which again is great from my perspective. I'm not as concerned as I was in previous periods about safety on site. We've had one period where during a storm event we ran out of capacity, in the stormwater detention and sediment pond, and we had to end up discharging some water to sewer. It was an issue between ourselves and the utilities team at NCC. So there's an issue. There's stuff we've still got to solve in and around the stormwater system, and there's conversations to go on there. One of the big things we're doing to try to mitigate those issues from continuing to occur is separating out catchments in the landfill that are now fully stabilised and are therefore not going to create sediment. So while we were building the Gully 2 access road and the stuff up the back and also the big front buttress, those areas were essentially stripped of vegetation and would carry sediment into the stormwater system. And so they were conveyed into the stormwater sediment ponds, and that added more area and therefore more flow to the sediment ponds. And now that those areas have been their construction has been finished, we've now stabilised it, grassed it, so they shouldn't carry sediment off those areas anymore. That then will mean that we can actually separate them and have them go directly around to the stream around the sediment ponds. So that will bring us close to where we need to be, or we hope it'll bring us close to where we need to be in terms of the sediment management. In terms of projects, the hail management facility, some stuff going on at Eves Valley there. It is operating. We've now got 400 and something tonnes, 700 tonnes in there. So actually above budget in terms of, I think we budgeted for 2,000 tonnes for the year. So we're slightly above budget for the amount of material going to Eves Valley. That's only class 3 material, so we're trying not to get class 4 or other cleaner materials. Overall, that's running well. What else have we got? The engine started reworking on the reuse of gas for our engine system at Eves Valley now that the flow rates and the gas quality issues have been resolved. The battery collection bin, I put quite a lot of information in here about that. I thought Stuart might be interested. We did a lot of testing on that system. We've tried out various ways of looking at it to see whether it's doing the job, and essentially protecting the well-being of people that would be surrounding it, the well-being of assets or other things that would be surrounding those bins. All of those tests have now demonstrated that it does what it's meant to do, and we're pretty confident that that it will protect the public while also collecting batteries, even if it goes on fire. And so the only thing that's going on at the moment is there's a whole, essentially an inverted commas, an operations manual for one of those bins being prepared, so that when they get put out in public, then people will know how to inspect to make sure there's water in the fire suppression system and all that sort of stuff. So there are a bunch of them being built. I think we've got 3 of them essentially available now, and between the 2 councils, we've looked at getting 10 for around the community. There's the work around the deed of agreement in terms of reference is ongoing. Odour management, there's been no odour issues or no litter issues during the period. And emissions management, we've been managing the gas system still to a high level. And there's other, works going on and around gas, particularly on the development of the renewable CNG system. So there's been a couple of good wins that we've had during the period. They're not things that we've had a hell of a lot of influence over. But the specific one is that the government has outlined its new ETS settings. So one of the ones that's slightly negative for us is that the default emission factor for carbon will increase from 0.91 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of waste disposed up to 1.023 tonnes of CO2 per tonne of waste. What that basically means is we will have to pay more carbon credits per tonne of waste. Now, because we have a 90% reduction on or a UEF of 90% reduced, that doesn't have a significant adverse effect on our economic situation. The initial work that we've done for this year's, so we've done a draft ETS report, and it's going to our validator. So that suggests that we are still at that 90% reduction, and we will still continue to stay at that, which is great. Another thing that was in that government settings change was the fact that historically there's been an inconsistency that wasn't recognised about whether or not you could destruct gas at the hospital, and whether it was because the rules said you had to destruct it on site. But we owned the hospital's boiler, and so therefore we considered that our own site. And so the government's come out and said that you're now allowed to destruct landfill gas off-site. So they've changed that rule, so we can now look to sell the boiler or some of those things if we chose to. But at the same time, they said if you turn gas into renewable CNG, you get a destruction factor of 99% when you turn it into CNG, not when you burn it. And now that's really big for us in our renewable CNG program, because it means that we don't have to do the validation of users in the community. We can actually sell it now, in theory, to Joe Bloggs for his barbecue, because we don't have to demonstrate that 2,000 people's barbecues were efficient at burning gas. So it really does de-risk this renewable CNG project, as we go forward. So there's still a lot of work to go on in that, building the business case, building the markets, all that stuff. But that was a really good win during the period in terms of the risk reduction on that project. ETS position is generally good. If you have any questions about that, Andrew can probably answer them. In terms of waste minimisation, there's not just the ongoing stuff, battery diversion, working with NCC and TDC on the JWMMP. And one of the things that isn't working quite as well as I had hoped is the diversion activities that are going on at York Valley. So the new contract that we have includes an incentive to the contractor to divert material from site. So if we take material from site, then the MFE levy that we get back, we share essentially most of it goes to the contractor to support that activity. But at the present time, the way we're running the landfill isn't encouraging or isn't supporting easy diversion of other materials other than metal. So we're not getting any wood or other things coming out. And it's something we're really I'm trying to put a lot of emphasis on with the contract at the present time to see how we can make that work. We're going to try and do some trials and see whether a change to the machinery helps. But it might mean some sort of change to the way we choose to run. At the moment, we've got a big loader that picks up the waste and shifts it, and that's not really very good for sorting through or separating out material. So there's some stuff that we'll have to do to try and encourage diversion. And then we'll obviously have to look at whether that makes economic sense, and that becomes a joint committee consideration of whether we're willing to spend more money to get an outcome if it's not economically viable. We've got a bunch of, I've been asked in NRSBU to put down a risk register about some significant risks, and I've done that here. So one of the ones that we're dealing with at the moment is the slips around the site. We've talked about this in the past, that the site has some unstable ground around it. And we're working with our geotechnical engineers at the moment to look at ways of mitigating those failure, land failure risks around the landfills, particularly so that there's no health and safety implications, or there's no access issues to the landfill. So there will be some costs this year to remedy ongoing slips, and that will have to come out of operational costs. I talked about stormwater management before. Again, back just down to budgets. There's wording issue here. We're under budget, i.e. we have a larger deficit than we were intending. It's a more negative situation than we were intending. However, that's on the back of quite a large cost for the sawdust, preparing in advance of the sawdust acceptance. And that sawdust has now come in, and we've obviously got the revenue for that. And so as of today, we are in surplus, whereas this report at the end of September was in deficit. Okay. Any questions?
No doubt there's quite a few. Councillor Stallard, would you like to start with yours and just adding that you want further information, or I will leave it over to you how you address that.
Thank you. Thanks for that report, Officer Clark. And it's always good to see your conclusions section, and it's good to see that the business unit is in a good position. And I appreciate your efforts with the wording around slightly less below or slightly less above budgeted deficit and so on. So it has been a help. Yes, some questions. The whole leachate, stormwater and so on. Just to clarify that, I guess when it rains, what we're getting is 3 types of water coming off it. If it's not carried in contact with waste, not carrying sediment, it can just go straight into a stream.
Correct.
Carrying sediment, it goes into the ponds, the sediment settles, then it goes into the stream.
Correct.
Anything in contact with waste, it goes into wastewater.
Correct.
So there is a potentially, as you've outlined, problems with capacity of the leachate wastewater one. What is the solution there?
So there are essentially, during normal situations, the landfill is running at about 1.5, 2 litres per second of leachate. Now, most of that water comes from, water coming out of the waste as it breaks down, or water coming from the ground in behind the landfill and slowly percolating down into the stream. And historically, in the last 2 or 3 years, that has been fairly consistent. During rainfall, it goes up a little bit. But recently we had this event where it went up significantly. And the reason it went up significantly was twofold. One is that the transfer facility that we have has an open dumping area. And we now consider that open dumping area to be an area where any rainfall that lands on that has now come into contact with waste, because you put waste on that area. So that has increased the open area for leachate to occur. That material goes directly into the sewer. And so we now have to, that's every time it rains, we get an increased flow from that area. That's not a huge area, and so it's sort of manageable. And we can put some mitigations in by putting some storage tanks or the likes in to try to buffer that and reduce the peaking of that flow. The one that caused us the bulk of the issue was that we had prepared the sawdust reception for the Tahona Beach area. So when we did that, we needed essentially an area with about 16,000 cubic meters of volume in it. And we had to put all our leachate lines and stuff in the bottom of it in advance of the sawdust coming, so that we can collect that. And so when we had rainfall events during that period, the rain on that area would go down, it would come into that system and then would go into the leachate system. And that was quite a large area and so it would increase the peaking and the volume of material going down the sewer. We've now accepted the sawdust and we've capped that area off. And so we think that number will come significantly down again after that thing. So there was a sort of a unique situation where we were trying to mitigate, essentially support the NCC in disposing of the back beach sawdust very fast. That's led to having an slightly consequence that we weren't necessarily thinking about at the time. We were thinking about making sure we could accept that material and have no adverse effects of that. We have in the past talked to NCC and talked to this committee, it might have been in a previous triennium, about in the event that resolution of the capacity needed to be undertaken, then the NTRLBU would seek to support the NCC in expanding the capacity of the sewer if that was necessary. And similarly, we've looked at options where we might choose to put in some leachate buffer tanks on the site, or to try to reduce the peaking factor of the sewer, or the material or the wastewater going to the sewer, the leachate going to the sewer. So there are some mitigations. I would like to wait again now after the sawdust hole has been, capped off, which it has, to then look at what stable leachate volumes are, and then try to mitigate that in the least cost way. And that might be to mitigate it close to the dumping pad, so that we are essentially reducing any peaking factor from the dumping pad, but not worrying about the residual, material underneath that's coming from the landfill itself, which doesn't seem to change significantly after rainfall events.
Thanks. That's a clear response, and I think that it's prudent to wait and see what the new baseline is, and acknowledging that it was a bit of a unusual situation with making space for the sawdust, but that it might happen again if there's another unusual sort of arrival of waste coming. Looking at your gas history, production and use by the hospital and so on figure, I did send through a comment that the shape of the graph for the past winter was really quite different for the previous 2 winters, which seemed to rise up to winter use and plateau for the winter, stay at that high level, and then drop down again. Whereas the past winter, it rose slowly to a very quite narrow peak and then decreased again. And you commented that it was a warm winter, and that explains it. So I just wonder if you could talk to that a bit more. And also, I understand that the hospital is interested in converting the second boiler to gas. So what the demand might look like next winter in terms of how much gas we're producing and what proportion of our gas would be taken up in the case of 2 boilers on gas?
Yeah, through the chair, the peak that they have is principally related to how much heat they need. The landfill gas supplies the bulk of the heat to the hospital for the steam production. They do have occasional, or some control. There has been some control, I'm going to say, vagaries of their system where coal boilers respond at a different rate to gas boilers. So the way you ramp them up, it takes half an hour or 3/4 of an hour, even an hour for a coal boiler to heat up compared to a gas boiler heating up really rapidly. And so our current boiler, the one that NTRLB owns, doesn't have full capacity for all of the steam load from the hospital under peak conditions. And so what they often have another one sitting there. And so what happens occasionally is that they ramp up the coal boiler, and it means that actually, because it gets up, its response time is so slow that we end up oversteam, too much steam demand, and then they would back off our boiler. So if their control system hasn't been, or they're running well, or they've been changing the person that's running it, and that's getting that happening more often, we will sell less steam from our boiler because they'll be putting it more in through their coal boiler. I think that the bulk of the issue with the seasonal graph is related to the warm winter rather than the control issues. It's not. I think that's the principal cause, but there are a range of different potential causes. In terms of the second boiler, they are currently, I don't know, we've actually, I think that's already completed. Yeah, it's completed this week. They've done a cut-in into our line. We gave them approval to cut into our gas line, and they've put a stub flange off that, and they're looking to connect boiler 2 to a new gas burner so that they can run boiler 2, which is one of their coal boilers, on gas rather than coal. And they're looking to start that burner somewhere around May of this year. I think the consent, they have some issues with their coal discharge consent that they're obviously trying to resolve. What will that do? It'll basically mean that we will need to supply additional gas down the line to them. We have a larger gas compressor in stock that we will switch into service to allow them to get that. And then that'll basically mean that essentially all of the gas on the hospital, or all of the hospital steam supply would be run from gas. Next question that you had was, how much of our gas would that use? We believe it would be around, it would probably be higher than 50% at the moment during those very high peak periods in the middle of winter. But that's the sort of order of magnitude. It's not 100%. It's above 50. But it's not 80.
Okay, thank you. So is there a third boiler, or there are just 2?
No, there are 3 boilers, but they're not proposing to convert their boiler 1, weird numbering, but to gas. They're essentially going to decommission that from service, is our understanding. So
I see. So potentially, or most likely, next winter there'll be no gas, no coal burnt at the hospital. Is that the case?
That is our understanding. That's where they're aiming for. They will still have a boiler that could run coal, but it's our understanding that boiler 1 that could run coal is not intended to be running. So it's intended that the hospital would run on gas.
Okay, and the boiler 1, you said they might just disestablish that.
That's our answer. That's my understanding.
So, but this is outside of current talk about a more permanent solution. But regardless,
this is currently running on our current gas supply contract that we have in place until May 2026.
All right. Well, that's good news. If I might continue, Stuart, just a couple more questions. Thank you. Talk about the possible future landfill. You said there are geotechnical issues with gullies. Forgive me if I got the numbers wrong, 2 and 3 perhaps.
Yeah.
Is this new information, and how does that affect the lifetime of the landfill?
So we did some geotechnical investigations at the end of last calendar year. We've now got those reports through, looking for fault lines and looking for shear points and stuff in gullies, principally in Gully 3. And we did identify that the Grampian fault, which is a very old and potentially an inactive fault, actually seems to turn and go up the base of Gully 3. So we, on the basis that there is a fault line that running up the base of Gully 3, that would essentially discount it as an appropriate landfill site for the future. So that's essentially where we're getting to. There was discussion about a section of Gully 2 being able to be used, but there's a lot of faulting in the top end of Gully 3 and over into Gully 4 that was question marked. And so we're basically suggesting that rather than using Gullies 2 and Gully 3 for landfill activities, if the geotechnical information suggests that they're not a good idea, and that we would look at alternatives to that. So part of our resource consent approach is to consider options, and we have to look at a lot of options and see what the alternatives that we should do for a landfill for disposal of landfill are. In this case, those were high on our list of good sites potentially, but unfortunately they're now not so good because of those geotechnical issues. So it's unlikely that we would consider putting a landfill on Gullies 2 and Gullies 3 now.
And so what's the lifetime of York if we're not going to do Gullies 2 and 3?
Currently, with our cap shape, the stability buttress, and the compaction rates and all those things, we think that we can extend the life subject to resource consent to somewhere around 2040. So that would continue to leave some residual capacity at the top of the landfill for emergency events in the future, which you could potentially get a consent that would allow you to open it for a major civil emergency. And then we would then look to go somewhere else after that. We would, at the present time, the highest point on the list after that would be our stage 3 at Eves Valley. But obviously we've got to go through a whole process as part of the resource consenting thing to look at all the options to determine which is the best outcome for the community.
Thank you. And given that kind of timeline, that perhaps we have capacity till 2040, and the legislation probably requires us to have a certain number of years of capacity, when would we start looking in earnest at a new site in terms of doing proper detailed work with regards to getting a consent?
Yeah, so we have funding this year, next year and the following year for work on our assessment of effects. So our deed of agreement in terms of reference don't actually reference the requirements. What it is the Joint Waste Minimisation and Management Plan has a reference in it. That requires us to have 5 years worth of consented capacity at any time and 2 years worth of constructed capacity at any time. A resource consent can for a landfill is quite a long process. The Dunedin City Smooth Hill landfill took nearly 10 years. So starting a consent, it's important to understand that the process is a long process. It was a new site, yes. Renewing a consent on our existing site should be more straightforward, I guess is a question of saying. But putting a new consent for a new site, particularly if you had a non-designated site, then it would become more and more difficult. So currently our strategy is to look to apply for a new consent for York Valley Gully 1 to extend the life from 2034. We'd consider that a closure consent. So we're basically saying, this is how we will take the consent through to the end of its life and how we close it and cap it off and make it safe. And then from there, we'd be looking for a new consent for a new facility at currently Eves Valley Stage 3 is where we think that's the case. But that could change.
Thanks for that. That's a clear explanation. And just in terms of Gullies 2 and 3 being cut by faults, but not Gully 1, do the faults kind of run parallel to the gullies? Is that why it's sort of a gully? I guess I feel like...
No, that's not correct. There is a fault line through Gully 1. It goes under our existing landfill. So the reason that we're considering continuing to extend Gully 1 is that it does not change the risk profile of the landfill. So we've already got that risk. It's already an existing risk. We're choosing to therefore maximise the use of our current landfill, create a sufficient money and or time to manage that risk. One of the things that we've sort of identified is that the risk of a landfill is actually generally less during its active life because we've got money to investigate and manage and develop stuff. Whereas as soon as we close stuff, obviously we're now using the residual money that we have put aside for it So keeping that alive and putting in a mitigation strategy while it's in place is in our opinion, a better answer. So we would be looking, and there will be issues potentially with getting that consent because of that fault line.
Okay, and the problem with the faults is that they would rupture and damage the membrane and stuff. They would get leachate. What's the problem?
The problem with the fault generically is that fault lines are generically less on a landfill that's lined with a geomembrane cover, like a plastic line or liner, they would potentially rupture that. Ours isn't like that. Ours has got a very thick clay liner, essentially. So the risk is that the clay on a fault can be more permeable than other more denser clays around it. And the question is, if that fault ruptures, then does that allow leachate to go down that notional crack? The information that we have developed, so we've done the geotechnical assessments, suggests that fault line is still a very impermeable fault, and if it ruptures, it would stay sealed. And because it's in a very deep clay, or clay-bound gravel lens, so we're not expecting it to cause a problem. But that's something that I'm not an expert on. The geotechs will have to support that. If they don't support it, then we'd obviously have a different scenario.
Okay, just one more question, if I might, and then just a couple of notes. I love talking about the emission factors. We have a unique emission factor for the landfill, but that's still linked to the default, is it? So it's still a percentage reduction from the default rather than displacing the default. Default. Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you. And some of these questions I did send through to you, and thank you for your answers. And those responses were circulated to members and staff. And just also, I did send through an amended motion that's on the screen. So when the chair is happy for that to be moved, I will do so.
Yeah, I think perhaps we'll go through the questions, but you're indicating you are happy to move that at the appropriate time. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Councillor Courtney.
Well, I'll give way to Councillor Trundy. You go first.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It's very accommodating of you, Councillor Courtney. I only have a couple of questions, but my opening comment, however, is what an amazing good story your report is. The health and safety factor alone. It's a delight to read because we've mitigated, obviously, through the process, a lot of the risk factors that we used to sit with. So well done to the team. I just wanted to ask a question around the bins battery process, and it's great to hear that we've tested them and they seem to be working quite good. And from what I've understood, there will be an operating manual produced. What will the comms look like, and when will we actually have these bins? Because I note that in the health and safety report there is just a few little battery incidents. I'm just keen to find out when those bins will be out in the community and how the rollout looks.
I'm going to give you a really inspecific answer as soon as we can. Unfortunately, that manual is taking a bit longer, and I need to get the two councils will be the ones deploying the bins, not the NTRLBU. So, between NCC's solid waste team and TDC's solid waste team are the ones that will be putting them in the community. It's not our place to do so. So we're supporting them in essentially in the supply of them and developing them. And then it'll be up to the two councils' solid waste teams to ensure that they go in the appropriate locations. The discussion has been at the council offices, and also at the waste management centres of the councils. So in NCC's case, that might be two locations, the Pascoe Street and at the office here somewhere, as an outside. And at TDC, that's obviously a much larger number of locations because they've got more, waste transfer or waste disposal facilities, and more council buildings. But that's essentially the generic discussion we've had. But it's up to them to choose to that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for informing me of that. Just trying to find where I put my second question. Oh, yes. So Councillor Stella obviously raised a lot and you were able to give really good answers around the leachate. I guess the challenge that we have is that when we have a new activity, okay, well, it's not really an activity, but because we took on the Tahanui Beach product, sawdust, we were able to create a space for it, but that came at a slight cost. So if we were to take on, if there was another significant event where we had some bulk material, do we now have a template to work through to work from the learnings from that so that the stormwater isn't compromised?
Yeah, through the chair, the real issue with the sawdust was the fact that it was considered a contaminant or a hazardous material with this contaminants in it. So we needed to make sure it was, put in a hole and covered up pretty quick. Whereas if we had a generic failure, let's say it had a large storm event or an emergency of some type that created a lot of debris, that wouldn't necessarily be considered something uncommon. We could just go in and fill with the current lift or fill plan that we're doing, and so we would essentially just fill more on the surfaces that we have, and they would get filled faster, and that wouldn't change the leachate development or leachate generation under rainfall events. The reason it was a problem in this particular scenario was because we had developed that area essentially as a containment area for that material, but it had to have leachate lines on it, and it was open for the duration leading up to that. And I think that the start of that was also a bit delayed compared to what we had expected. I had to talk to Will about that specifically. So it was just that was open for some time before we had had that product coming. In a normal situation, we would just continue to run our process as it normally runs, and it wouldn't have exposed leachate lines, etc., at the bottom of this new area. So it is something, however, we should be conscious of. And so I think one of the things we didn't put the importance on it that we could have during the period, and it's something we might need to take on more emphasis on in the future if that similar situation occurred. The only time I see that situation occurring in a similar way in the future is either a contaminated material like we had this time, or a biosecurity incursion, which we have in the past. And that's actually the most likely one. If we had to develop a cell with the leachate system in it for a biosecurity incursion, then we would need to make sure that system was managed from a leachate perspective.
Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to Officer Nathan. Thank you for your report. Very interesting. Appreciated it. Very early on in your report, you mentioned that you made mention of the new regional landfills operation contract. And then I noticed you went on to say that it was started in July 1st, I think it was, this year. That's correct. Then you wanted to say that there were it wasn't a new contract. It was a new contract.
The variations
that followed from that. That surprised me somewhat. It had been going a few months, and it was costing more, the contract, than the previous one. In fact, quite a lot more. And yet there were early variations with an S on it. Can you just develop that a bit more?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did when we set up that contract is we essentially set out a set of accepted standards that that each would be working to. And one of those, there were things like stabilisation of the surface of the landfill to mitigate sediment. There were other things in there. And so some of those things that when the previous contractor left, the landfill wasn't actually at the standards that we were looking to continue to run at. And so as the new contractor came in, there were mitigations that we need to implement to get to the point where the contractor and ourselves were comfortable. We were now working on those standards. And so they weren't able to make an assessment of that prior to the contractor leaving. And there were obviously some variations that accrued from that. The biggest variation that accrued over that period, however, was the variation for the development of the sawdust pole. And that was the bulk of that additional cost that we incurred. $260,000 or something was of that overarching variation cost. So while there are a number of other variations in there, most of those were relatively small. Some of them related to stabilisation, some of them related to stormwater improvements. You know, there's a bunch of different pieces that were essentially bringing this landfill to an appropriate standard for ongoing activity. Yep. And I'm comfortable with the variations that have been developed. I've said they are fair between the parties.
Thank you for that. I'm looking at 11.10, and that's in relation to the continuation with continuing to develop the renewable compressed natural gas project. And did you anticipate the government changing the rules on this?
I anticipated them changing the settings to allow it to be distracted off-site. My ear to the ground in this industry means, you know, with the level of issues with our natural gas supplies in New Zealand and with the lobbying that some other parties have been doing, some of the staff of those parties used to work for me personally, you know, so I have some linkages into some of that lobbying that's going on. So I knew some of that the ability to distract off-site was likely to change. I had no idea when. That was the big issue. Well, you know, we didn't know when the government would necessarily take that on board. But we had in our mind we had time because we, you know, our renewable CNG system won't come online for 2 or 3 years potentially. But it was always a risk in this project. It's now been removed as a risk. The one I didn't expect, which is the biggest gain, is this destruction efficiency when gas is formed, not when it's destructed, when it's burned. And that's actually a really good outcome for us. And the reason the government have done this is not because of us. You know, we're incidental in this. It's because when most companies are developing renewable CNG, they're putting into a pipeline. And they can't determine which molecule of gas in that pipeline was the gas that came from that biofacility compared to the stuff that came from a hole in the ground. So they're basically having to have a mechanism to allow them to validate it, you know, before it goes into the pipeline, rather than at the other end. Whereas for us, it would have been easier to validate at the other end because we would be putting it into tanks, and so you can actually follow the custody of that material through its life.
Thank you for that. Another one from me. I'm just curious to know, have you got any good news for us in respect of the business case or the market research, the concept plan for the reuse of the remaining gas at the landfill?
So yes, we're in the process of continuing to develop the business case for that work. So there's ongoing work. There's been looking at markets. There's looking at risks, at legislation. There's a whole bunch of work going on and packages that will eventually lead to a business case that says this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. And the joint committee will then at that point need to make a decision whether it wants to proceed or not, as the case may be.
Is there an air of urgency about it?
Yes.
From you?
It's one of my key work streams. So yes.
Good. You've got a smile on your face. I thought there might be some sort of snippet of news that you could share with us.
Oh well, the biggest snippet of news is that one we've just talked about. The fact that 99% destruction factor happens, that really makes this thing. It really does reduce risk on that whole project. So that makes it more likely that it will achieve the outcomes we were looking for. More viable, yeah.
Well, I'm going to manufacture some good news here because there's some good news here that excited me on 6.3 when you talked about the compaction, the new machine.
Yep.
There, I thought the E520 compactor increased compaction, and I thought, well, there was a good news story. And right on the tail of that was the fact, and you identified it in your report as significantly, the temporary transfer facility. You've gone to the expense of providing that, and in return, you've got reduced vehicle turnaround times, you've got reduced mud on local roads and providing us safer area to unload. Now, to me, those are huge efficiencies. They really are. And I can't help but think that's going to be a real boost to NTR LUB, reducing costs, streamlining operations in your processes, but most importantly of all, assisting the work team, the team that work there, to do their job better. So I want to congratulate you on that. There's two significant efficiency moves there.
Yeah, from the chair, I mean, when we came up with this temporary transfer facility, and we'd like to move to a permanent one at some point, there was a recognition that it would cost us more. And the Joint Committee chose to accept that additional cost in our business plan, to accept it as we moved forward. But it does cost us more. One of the things that has really energised me out of this process is that when we do our, I go up and stand in the traffic controller's hut occasionally and talk to the operators of the trucks coming through and ask them how they're getting on and what's going on and how they're, liking it. And one of the guys who owns a truck said to me, I was considering not continuing in this business of, hauling waste because I wasn't really making any money. And this change has reduced the turnaround time enough that I get another load in a day and I can make money now. And that really energized me. And that efficiency made it like, okay, it's costing us some more money, but it's really streamlined the process on site. They don't have to clean their trucks. They don't have as many flat tires. There's a bunch of things that are for our customers that it's really significant. And that's obviously, it's not something we were specifically focused on. We were focused on safety when we did this. We were focused on our side of the fence, and making sure that the environmental outcomes were right. But the consequential things are significant for the customers. And that has energized me. Yeah.
Other questions, but I think I'll leave them. I think we've had enough now.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney. Just a few from myself, and then we'll look to move the resolution, which Councillor Stanley has foreshadowed. So firstly, from myself, Nathan, just in relation to the material that's gone to Eves Valley, is that about the quantity volume we expected, and is that going to make any difference to the long-term usage in Eves Valley? 700 tonnes does seem quite a lot.
Yeah, so Eves Valley had a residual capacity of around 70,000 cubic metres on the top of stage 2. That is still available with our new consent for emergency capacity for, emergency situations if we had a major calamity within our region, or if York Valley was, inaccessible for some reason. We are choosing to use a portion of that capacity in this early period of the Class 3 facility, and we are in the process of trying to get a consent for Class 3 facility for the top of our old stage 1 landfill is essentially a larger capping layer, and then we'll and also endeavour to get some capacity in a lower gully, so that there's a sequence of locations where we would put this material in at Eves Valley. Our budget was for 2,000 tonnes of Class 3 material for this calendar year, so we are not far off budget in that context. And that the benefit of Class 3 materials is generally soil, so it doesn't take up as much volume. It's heavier and more dense than general waste. So from a material perspective, it doesn't materially change the capacity that we have on the stage 2 landfill for emergencies, on the assumption that we can get a consent for the top of stage 1 or the gully below stage 1 in a timely fashion. If we put in 7,000 or 10,000 tonnes on there onto stage 2, that still won't materially change our ability to accommodate an emergency. But if we start going too far past that, it would potentially start to eat into what capacity we might have on stage 2 to accept a significant adverse event in our region. We have deregistered with the Ministry for the Environment Eves Valley as a Class 1 facility. It's now only registered as a Class 3 facility, so we don't have to pay an emission, ETS emissions and stuff on that. And it can be re-registered as a Class 1 at any time in the future if there was an issue. And our consent, however, does allow us to dispose to stage 2 in the event of an emergency or if York Valley was out of service for a unforeseen circumstance.
Thank you. So yeah, as Councillor Courtney said, lots of good news in the report, and particularly around the battery bins. Just wonder, and maybe for Richard or Alex, how we, and particularly for Tasman, how we get them out into our communities and how we're going to monitor them. I do see that the free that the people were being shed, but what we've found is surprisingly large volumes of batteries coming through them. And obviously you need someone to keep a bit of an eye on them. I'm thinking most of our communities have got groups like Men Shed, whether that's an option for them just to look after them and help us when they're full and something like that. So, we've got 3 townships with their bins, so I'm thinking that these would possibly go to Richmond, Motueka, and maybe Golden Bay and Murchison.
Can I ask you a question? Who's putting these bins out? Is it NRTBU or is it us two councils as part of their solid waste activities?
Yeah, so it was the waste. Essentially, the NTRBU has developed them. We've tested them to ensure that they're safe, and then we're essentially supporting the 2 councils with the output. So we will pay, NTRBU pays money for the collection of the batteries, but we don't control the bins themselves in the community. That's outside of our mandate to manage stuff inside your territory per se. But we have contributed funding. There's $50,000 a year for the management of those.
Well, obviously, my team haven't briefed me on this because I have no clue about that. I presume David Stevenson's fully aware of it. That's fine. In that case, it's going to be a consideration for our annual plan process if there is an additional cost on our part over and above what the NTRBU is doing.
Yeah, but you're saying there's some contribution towards the cost.
Yeah, in our business plan each year we have $50,000 for the management of those battery stuff. So about 25k to NCC and 25k to TDC, which is outside of the local disposal levy allowance. So,
because I know that Paparura, the mentioned they've collected over 100 kilos of batteries now, which is. And we just start thinking about the weight of batteries, not very much. That's a lot of batteries. But I looked in the one at Wakefield yesterday or the day before, and yeah, buckets are getting full again. So there's definitely people will use them. There's no doubt about that. So no great addition. I've just got to work on getting there. A couple of others before we 3 more in fact. Just in relation to the scrap metal or the waste diversion you talked about from the landfill and the incentive for the contract, I'm surprised that they even got 8 tonnes of metal with a higher price for scrap metal, because I've even been taking some myself in the days I don't have to go to council. And the wife hasn't got a job for it.
through the chair. Currently, the way that the diversion works is that our contractors and the previous contractor also would only essentially spend the time and energy diverting heavier steel materials. Not if it's lightweight or it's mixed with other stuff. Then it doesn't. It's more time than it's worth for them to separate it and take it out. One of the things that we need to do as the NTRBU, myself and Will, is to try to help the contractor understand and find ways of having an outlet for those materials. Steel's easy. It can go to a recycling agency. But when we want to do diversion of other materials, whether it be chipboard or whether it be timber, pallets or whatever, we need to actually have a mechanism for reuse of that material. There's no point separating it and having nowhere for it to go. So a big element of the actual diversion isn't necessarily the separation, it's the outlet for that product that is separated. And that's where the issues start to accrue for us. I mean, metal's easy, but chipboard generically, historically, has gone to, gardening centres to mix in with compost and other things. Wood, in theory, could turn into fuel. That's a question about how do you do that? And how do you get an appropriate, safe approach to do that? And that's something we're really struggling with at the present time. It's something we're focused on, but I don't have an answer at the present time.
Because haven't we been doing, I'm not sure this is for you or Richard again, haven't we been doing something at Beach Road about encouraging the builders to do exactly what Nathan's talking about, take their wood and waste out of the mainstream There are.
That's right. We've got a facility that's been built there for,
It's a private facility.
no, it's run by us, but it's for all building construction material, yeah.
Through the chair, both councils are doing a significant amount of work actively trying to support the building industry separating wastes. The landfill receives wastes that don't go via the Pascoe Street and or the transfer stations. And as a result, we have wastes that are coming in that, that'll come in full of timber or full of pellets or full of, other things that haven't gone past those separation facilities. Those separation facilities are also only voluntary. So if someone doesn't want to use them, they don't use them. That material will still come to us. So the idea is, how can we actually do something to mitigate that or to divert that material if we can? And does it make sense? Is there economic for us to do so? There's a bunch of questions.
Right, thank you. So then just turning to finance, and I think Councillor Stowell had sent an email to Nikki around the potential, that currently looking at a loss and potentially going through the year. Just wondering if we could have a bit more. It seems quite a large loss for the year.
Yeah, so through the chair, looking at it initially, I was worried, and then I dug into it and I wasn't worried. I was worried in the fact that our costs were high and our revenue was only on budget. But the costs are high for a reason. And some of those reasons were initiation of our contract, those variations to get ourselves to the right standard. And those costs were high for the development of that area for the class, or for the sawdust material.
Yeah.
And as a result, we would expect, and we do expect, higher costs because of those operational things. There will be some ongoing higher costs during the year. There's some repairs to slips around the site, which will eat into the money make our expenses higher. But we are now, as of today, we are in surplus, significantly in surplus compared to the budget. And so even those slip repairs, they'll just take us back toward budget. So so I think we are in a positive position today, and we should not be concerned about the end of year outcome that we're looking at.
Yeah, well, not so sure this is a question for you or Andrew, but if we do have a loss, does that just get carried forward, as Nikki alluded to, or what that stays within the closed account?
So if the loss continued, which it won't, because we've seen October since the report was drafted, and it goes into a significant surplus. If at the end of the year there's a loss, then that would be taken into account in the next annual plan and spread over the next 10 years or the balance of the life. So each year we do adjust the carry forward. That's only, we take into account the surplus or deficit in setting the fees going forward.
Through the chair, I think it's also important to note that we had budgeted for an annual deficit this year. Well, we had budgeted for an annual deficit. So we were not currently in this month, we were not actually as far negative as we were budgeting to be for the end of the year.
Right.
The reason we had budgeted for that deficit was we were in surplus, over 2 years. And we were looking to use that surplus to offset the gate fee. And we had budgeted for a larger deficit in the next year. So we're basically looking to try to mitigate those surplus. We're buffering that account as we go forward in years. So while it's a big number, and while it's a big number at the start of the year, there are valid reasons for it being a big number in terms of expenses. And those have now been mitigated by the revenue that came from that activity. Right, the sawdust has now generated the income that we were expecting.
Thank you. And then finally, just in relation, and this is probably a question for you, Alec or Richard, just in relation to the proposed resolutions around the terms of reference, do you have any comment about what's been the catalyst for this, or do you just want to proceed with the resolutions? I'm just wondering.
Well, at the moment, we're almost finalised. There's 1-2 more questions come back from Russell McVeigh on it, and then it's done. And then it'll be coming back to the 2 councils for verification. So what's our inclined of that resolution is going to happen anyway. So, yeah.
So what was that, Elizabeth?
So what is asked for in that resolution is going to happen anyway.
Okay. Alec, anything to add?
No.
No. A timeline on that? How long are we likely to see that?
Well, as I say, we've got a meeting scheduled next week to answer the final 2 questions, and then after that, we're away. At the moment, it's an interesting space we're in because I'm being advised by our team within Tasman District Council, and Alex piggybacking on those discussions as well. So, yeah. So in effect, our legal team's advising Tasman, not Nelson, but Alec is aware of the discussions and what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard and I'm sitting in every single meeting with Richard, and we're working together. And as Richard has said, everything that's up there will happen. We will probably. I don't know whether we're meeting. I don't know whether we'll sort this out before Christmas in anticipation of the next council meeting. I mean, it is the Christmas break. I don't know what the next meeting. There may be more questions at the next meeting, and there's an iterative process going back, but we are well advanced in terms of down this path. And I think there will be several more meetings. I don't think the meeting next week is going to be resolving this, but I think that the gap will be narrowing as we move through. So, yeah, well advanced on this work.
Thank you.
Can I just add that probably is going to be item B is the one that we'll probably end up with. Can also say that the documents, it's not a train wreck. It's not a sense there's something major dislocation occurring. It's more aligning, wording, making sure that we're consistent. So that's basically what it's about. And we got tripped up after Nelson adopted that we've been going through a whole lot of legal reviews of all our agreements in 2022. And it just happened this one got caught up in that. There were questions asked about one lawyer's views of another lawyer's views. So it's a challenge for us, but we'll have the answer through to you next year.
Thank you. Councillor Stallard, with that, I'm not sure if you've got any questions related to that, if had a view of mind to move those resolutions as they are, or if you want to make any minor amendments. Or
No, I'd prefer to move them as they are. Thank you.
okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Walker's having a second. Okay. Councillor Courtney, did you want to speak to that or something else?
Well, I wanted more clarity from the officers because this is material to me. You know, exactly where we are at the moment. You know, we're looking at reports passed 3 months ago and today, and just one sentence in respect of this particular issue. And I just want to know clearly from office, and I think I heard it, that things are progressing. And, you know, I've got to ask, what is the urgency about this particular matter? That's my first question. Is there a degree of urgency about it? Someone like to answer me?
Well, I can answer that. It's been going on for 2 years, and given the predicament that we're all in at the moment, because this isn't a train wreck, it's just tidying up a document. That's why it's been delayed and delayed. It's been a lower priority, and that's why the delay has occurred. I'll just be upfront about that. And now we're bringing it to a head, and we'll have a decision early next year.
And through the chair, the only thing that I can iterate, and I reiterated the advice that I've given this committee on several occasions, that the terms of reference that we are working under at the moment, which is obviously the NCC approved and the TDC, does not prohibit or affect the ability of this committee to undertake business. And I stick by that, and it's something that we all agree with, Richard. And that's just a statement of fact. I'm rest assured that I can say that to the committee, that we're able to conduct and undertake business. But there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes based on the fact that the committee at the last meeting stressed that they wanted to move this forward. But this is a I dare say it's a complex piece of work. We've got to go through. We're dealing with 2 councils. We've had to find time to meet. We've had to go through individually to look at the clauses. We're well advanced, but personally, I'm unsure that we need that. But that's not my decision. That's yours. But I can say that the ability of this committee to operate has not been affected, and we've heard the committee and we're well advanced in terms of investigating all the matters that are on the table.
Richard?
Thank you for that.
There was one other key thing that we would have had to review anyway, and that's the Commerce Commission edict about when the business unit was formed, about how we perform. There have been some changes to the legislation around collaboration. So we would have had to do a review of those anyway in light of those changes in the legislation. So we're incorporating that review in this as well.
And I provided the committee with that update last time.
Thank you. So, any further questions or discussion, debate around that, or?
I'd like, in the light of what our officers have told us from both TDC and NCC, whether the mover of this motion or amendment,
Motion.
whatever it is,
Motion of the stage.
it's a motion, is it? Motion. Is of a mind to withdraw it in light of what the officers have said.
Would you like me to respond to that, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
please. Yeah.
Yes. I guess in the wider context, when this work was done in the past council term by the then chair of this committee and council staff, the officers were asked to bring it to each council independently, the revised terms of reference for this committee and the revised deed of agreement between the councils for running of the landfill. So that was adopted by Nelson City Council in September of 22. And as we know, it has been more than 2 years. It hasn't been brought to the table at TDC. And in a previous meeting of this committee, it was discussed and we were told by Officer Levitas that there was more work and we shouldn't expect to see those back anytime soon. So to me, that raised the prospect of it was going to span 3 council terms without coming back to the governance table. And I think we have a responsibility to maintain governance oversight over these kinds of projects. So appreciate the update from officers. It's good news that it might end up being option B, but I think we still need to have a formal paper back to this committee with information so that we can be well informed about where it's at. Obviously, if it went to the full committees before that point, before we reconvene, perhaps we wouldn't need that report back, but that's something that can be addressed in time. So thanks for the question, Councillor Courtney, but yes, I would like to proceed with this amended motion.
Any other comments, discussion? If not, I'll move to put the resolution, which is 1 through to 2, including A, B and C. All those in favour will say aye. Oh, hang on. Councillor.
Sorry, I thought we were going to speak to this.
Oh, there, I just gave you asked you that.
Oh, that was questions? I didn't.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I did say questions or debate, but if you've got some debate, that's fine.
Well, yes, I think when you put the fairness lens, which we must always do, and compromise too, when you put the fairness lens over this amendment or this motion, it doesn't pass the test. Not in light of what our officers have told us. And I know the tremendous pressure that they are on at both councils. And I highly respect their views. They say it's underway. Now, look, these are our neighbours we're dealing with here, and it seems to be emphasis on Tasman District Council awaiting their response. And I never condemn people because they want to be thorough. Thoroughness is a good quality, and this is an important document. Hasn't been reviewed for a long, long time, and TDC are taking their time. And I think we have to be mindful of that. This is a joint committee of NCC and TDC, and all the joint committees I've been on in the past, you settle these matters by compromise. Compromise. You don't go in with something like this. It is bordering on hostile or demanding or overriding the processes that are already in place. And so my judgment tells me that we shouldn't be doing this. It's not the right approach. We just need to go climb over the fence and have a closer talk to our neighbours and hurry them along. I don't believe this is conducive to the ongoing business of this committee. If we send demands to one council ahead of another, I don't think it's appropriate. So I won't be supporting this.
Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Through you, Chair. Well, I don't disagree with some of what Councillor Courtney says, but I also sit here, this is my second term, albeit not the full second part of this term. And I know that this conversation about the terms and reference has come up multiple times. This isn't the first time. And we have previously, how did you phrase it? Climbed over the fence. And we've gone back as TDC councillors and requested some information. And we know that it hasn't been a priority. And we've got Richard Kirby sitting here today telling us it hasn't been a priority. There may be a conversation around here that says it hasn't hindered us moving forward, but actually it is a thorn in our side. It is something that needs to be resolved. And I think that what Councillor Stallard has done is actually brought it to an attention so that actually we can get it addressed in a timely manner without it being dragged on any further, particularly not into the third term of whoever sits around this table. I don't personally see this as being a hostile approach. However, that's my thoughts on it, and I'm happy to still second this motion.
Right. My thoughts are similar, and that I think this actually, as you've said, has been pretty much around since the end of the last term. And I think that's pretty much when the Nelson City Council got the terms of reference that were currently worked out under the previous chair in the previous term, and we haven't got to that. I think the report's reasonably open, Councillor Courtney, in that it does give options. It does say, well, look, we can come back with new versions for both councils. I would go with the Nelson City Council. I think there are some options provided in here. It's work we've been looking for, as Councillor Walker said, for some time. And I think that's, and his report by and large, as I gathered it from when the officers spoke, they're supportive of this approach. So I don't see that it's anything derogatory. I think it's a way forward to get this matter sorted for this term of council. So I continue to support it. I'm going to come to you, Councillor Stallard, for a right of reply before I put it.
Thank you, Chair Bryant. Thank you to my colleagues for your contributions. Yeah, we have heard from Councillor Courtney that he believes officers are under pressure in this. He's satisfied the process is underway and there's a process of thoroughness and that we're making demands on staff. We've also heard actually that it's just simply the delays because it's been given a low priority. There's not a lot of work to do, mainly wording and maintaining consistency between the documents. Now, given that as a bit of a dynamic situation with the government legislation around the Commerce Commission's determination and the fact it has been a low priority, I still see it is responsible of us in fulfilling our governance duties to move this amended motion so that we do have at least something of a backstop that we know we will have the information we need to be well informed about the issue. It just doesn't continue to drift as a low priority into the over 3 council terms. So I appreciate all the feedback. But certainly, I think this is a good way forward, just in terms of us having the information at our fingertips.
Thank you. With that, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No, and we'll have a vote on that.
As it recorded against, or did you mean a division?
Yeah, we'll have a division, yeah.
For request for a division? Does your standing orders, I would take it allow for
We'll just run.
Councillor Courtney,
No,
Councillor Stallard,
Aye.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Sorry, Councillor Bryant.
4, aye.
So it's 3-1.
The resolution is carried 3-1. Thank you. I think at this time, we've got the business plan to go, are you going to go through that and so?
I can go through that now.
Or other than that, we can have a cup of tea and then come back to that because the committee item. Should do that.
And
Got the teas on. Yeah, let's have a break.
Have a break? Yep. All right, we'll do that. So we come back at 5 to 11 or thereabouts. Right. I think we move now to the business plan, isn't it? Sorry, I'm not in the right place. It's not a good idea when you're the chair. Which starts on page 25. Nathan, have I got that right?
That's correct. Yeah, through the chair. As you know, the process that we follow for the business plan is we generate one. It comes to the joint committee for approval for sending to the council for feedback. That was done. The councils in their meetings gave no feedback, but we received feedback from the officers. They've now gone back and considered that feedback. And this here report basically relates to that feedback and how we've modified the business plan to incorporate that feedback. So essentially, what the feedback was is that the officers of the council would like us to try to maintain the landfill budgets to be the same as the activity management plan year 2, and we've looked at whether we can do that. We had made 2 changes from a capital perspective in the business plan, or in the draft business plan, and we've chosen to essentially pull those capital requests back to try to maintain the activity management plan budgets. And from an operational perspective, the draft business plan had sought an extra, the business plan, or the gate fee had gone up compared to the AMP by $6. And that was relating to essentially $5 worth of, I think it's $6, it might be $11. I can't remember. I'll have to look at the details. That was related to a $5 increment for an increased waste management levy from MFE that was not available and not known at the time the AMP was produced, and escalation from the inflation over the previous years. So what we're basically proposing is a business plan that remains with the activity management plan capital budgets, but changes the operating budget to accommodate the increased inflation and the increased MFE cost. And essentially that's where we get to. So we're recommending option 1, adopt the business plan 2025, which is this amended plan that was amended from the draft.
Thank you. Happy for questions, comments. Councillor Stallard, I think you.
Oh, I've been nominated. Thank you. That's being voluntold. That's a kahu-paki phrase. A few questions. Just looking at the options. Checking for consistency between the advantages for option 1 and the disadvantages. The advantage, it says the existing capital program is continued. It seems to indicate it's not affected, and yet the disadvantage says it requires other activities to be deferred or reduced in scope. So could you speak to that? What seems to me is to be an apparent contradiction.
Through the chair, I guess that we probably should have said a high priority capital programs can continue. One of the things that we've done in our business plan is, from the AMP was we had a number of programs in there. Some of those programs were diversion of material from the landfill, and other programs were related to gas reuse. So those programs have had different, essentially had funds allocated to them. And in this context, what we're saying is that the gas reuse program is considered to be a priority program. One of the other programs, diversion of waste, is still obviously important. But given the fact that we've extended the life of the landfill and the airspace and those things, we've actually now got ourselves to a position where the landfill is in a good position. Yes, we would like to continue to divert waste. It's a program we want to carry on running, but I believe we can continue the high priority program by deferring some of those lower, in our mind, programs to maintain this.
Thank you. If I could just have a couple more questions. Another disadvantage of option 2 is the state's increase the capital works program. Is that related to capacity or some other problem?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yes, a disadvantage of option 2 of maintaining all the existing projects and then doing the gas upgrade on top of that.
Yep.
A disadvantage is stated it's an increase to the capital works program.
Yeah, so obviously there's more work to be done. It means that our staff and or have to do more work. I mean, there's a disadvantage. Yeah. Is it insurmountable? No. You know, if we had that additional funding, we would do the work and we'll get the outcomes. So it was considered a disadvantage, but it's not an insurmountable disadvantage.
Okay, thank you. And the other disadvantage, because I do note that the advantages of options 1 and 2 are quite similar, so I'm focusing on the disadvantages. The second disadvantage of option 2 is the possibility of needing to consult on the annual plan 25-26 because it deviates from the long-term plan year 2. I couldn't see sort of that was quantified, so I did get in touch with our group manager for strategy and communications this morning. He does handle that work for long-term plan and annual plan, around whether this might trigger a consultation, need to consult. And the response was a clear no. It is a judgment call based in terms of the need to consult on amounts, financial amounts, deviation, community interest, sensitivity, history of the issue, involvement, strategic assets, etc. But provided it's something that's not especially contentious with the public, it would need to be a deviation in the millions rather than sort of this kind of amount. So I'm not sure if there was any other advice that was sought before this report.
In that field. I mean, my understanding is that where we materially change something, we would generally try to consult on it in the long term or the annual plan. But I can't answer your advice is probably better than the advice that I have. So, from my perspective, there was a risk that it would require a requirement to consult on the annual plan, and as a result, it was I added it into that.
I think, Alec, do you want to add on?
Oh, through the chair, yes. The advantage says may require, and the advice. I was listening to the advice that Councillor Stallard got from Nikki McDonald, I'm presuming, and I think that advice is consistent with the advice given to the senior leadership team and through all the workshops, and will be discussed on the 12th of December. This is not material. I need to say that Nathan took on board what Richard and I asked him to do. We know our budgets are both tight, and we know we're both going through an exercise both at NCC and TDC to look at all our budgets. And Nathan took that on board. We asked him, please, to try and stay within the realms of the budgets. It's 500,000. It's not material overall. Nathan said that you could live with that, and that's what's presented to you today. In terms of how NCC and TDC deal with the fees, from an NCC perspective, we will, if it's within CPI, then we won't change. But if it's greater than CPI, then we will need to take a separate report in terms of fees and charges to our council to figure out how we deal with that. At all bases, what this looks like is that CPI is probably in line with the increase that's been proposed here, so it looks like we're okay. So, yeah, I agree. The 500,000 is not material. It wouldn't even reach a low bar to consult, but it feeds into the bigger question for each council to consider. And in terms of the CPI and the percentage increase, I think we're there or thereabouts. So I don't think this is a train smash, but certainly I want to thank Nathan and his team for trying to do what Richard and I asked him.
Thank you.
Just finally, one more question, if I may. I do appreciate the fact that this was considered about the potential for it to trigger consultation, because certainly the feeling at NCC is let's stick to year 2 of the long-term plan as much as possible, and so we don't have to go out for consultation. So it's good that's been considered. When I read your update in the previous agenda item, I think there's a few things that strike me is that, and that's a strong positive, is the way the landfill is just looking at initiative after initiative to improve efficiencies and seek opportunities and so on. And I really want to ensure we give you that flexibility to pursue those initiatives, and those original project budget items that were in there that might have to be reduced in scope were shifted around to accommodate the $500,000 under option 1. Those budget items were in there for a reason. So the question is just in a general sense, would option 2 simply give you more flexibility in running the landfill than option 1? Because that, for me, that's the key consideration.
Through the chair, not having to juggle budgets would be easier. But I believe that we can juggle the budgets in such a way that we can achieve the outcomes and still meet the bulk of, those issues and meet those things and those innovations that we're seeking. So I have put a priority on the gas stuff. There are time limitations on that. There are less time limitations on some of the other actions that we are taking, and so we can defer without significant adverse consequence. So I am comfortable that we can adopt option 1 and achieve good outcomes on behalf of NTRLU.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you through Chair. Just point of clarification. So you can defer without consequences. Financially, does that come at a bigger cost?
Through the chair, all it does is delay some of those other programs. So essentially what we would do is allocate the money that we're looking for from our, in this particular case, we've got a waste disposal or a waste diversion activity we've been trying to develop, which will assist us to divert more waste. We'd divert that money to the gas system for the 25-26 year, and then we'd look to backfill that money out of the renewable CNG program later in a later future year, once with that the renewable CNG program's finances are more defined, and we've got more resolution on what those are.
So a couple more, if I may, through the chair.
Sure.
Yep. So environmentally, is there a cost, and is there any extra costs that may come across or putting us at risk with regards to health and safety by pulling back on any of what we had in there that we're now going to potentially pull back on?
So through the chair, the 2 programs that I'm looking to utilise the funding for, one was our alternative daily cover program, which we can continue to use our current processes into the future, and they won't create an adverse effect to the environment or to health and safety. The other one is this waste diversion and project, which was including looking at shredding material so we can separate out metal and other things better. In that program, we haven't developed a business case effectively for that, so it's possible that program might not be economically viable when we go through that process. We have to go through that yet. So I'm okay with us delaying that to a future time. We still have to do the actual business case elements around that. And essentially what we've done is delayed all of that business case on the basis now that we are looking at using the funding for that for the hospital and the renewable CNG and all that gas program.
Councillor Courtney, did you have any?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is challenging, isn't it, holding the line with budgets? It's called discipline, but it has to be done regularly in business anyway. Through you, Mr. Chair, could I ask the officers whether in their considerations of saying hold the line, did they at that time take into consideration the contaminated sawdust and the, I was going to say windfall, but I won't. I'll say revenue boost that the contaminated sawdust gave the landfill business unit, of using those funds where, to keep the momentum going, you know what I mean?
Through the chair, you need to talk to the accountant about the validity of using operational charges and operational funding to do capital works. So we've generally been, we have to separate funding streams that we get. The money we're talking about is a capital funding stream versus the funding that we have from sawdust, which comes in as an operational funding stream. We do as best we can to understand the differences and to use the funding that we have in operational streams where, fixing a slip is which we're going to have to do this year. But if we can fix a slip in such a way that it also minimises the cost on a capital project, we will definitely do that. So, that it's not, essentially we're using operational funding for operation purposes, but it also potentially reduces the cost of a capital project. So we are very conscious about the way we use the money we have available to us to try to get the most benefits we can from those activities we're using it for. I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for, but
It wasn't really, but it was a good one. I can't.
Hang on, Councillor Courtney.
maybe Mr. Bishop can answer that question.
Got a response.
So with the sale of airspace for the sawdust, Tahununu sawdust, that's occurring this year. That space would have been sold sometime in the future. What has changed is our view, and it's because we don't have a consent yet, we can't take that into account. But in the back of our minds, we've got the view that the physical life of the landfill has been extended, mainly by the compaction rates, but also the slips that Nathan's talking about. That actually creates a bit of airspace as you remove that material, and he's strengthening the face of the landfill, has used material from the back, so it's increased the airspace. So whilst it's an operational expense, we have actually had a capital gain from it. So in one sense, the fact, largely the windfall gain is only a timing gain because a lot of our fixed costs stay the same, particularly the local disposal levy. So, there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot.
Councillor Courtney, did you have anything further? No. Thank you. So just a question from myself before I put the resolutions. Nathan, just in relation to the waste disposal levy and the $5 increase, have they given us any indication going forward if it's going to be around that each year? Or?
Yeah, they've given us a 3-year snapshot, $5 increase each year for 3 years. And we don't know what happens after that, but we would expect, we will need to accommodate another $5 next year. And, the 26, 27 and then 27, 28 years, they all go, they just another $5 each year. So
straight onto the gate price.
Straight onto the gate price, yeah.
There's nothing we can do about that.
Well, we can. I mean, if you want to subsidise something in some way, you can run a deficit, you can do other things, but it's not necessarily in the interest of the community to do so. What we are trying to do is minimise or make our operations efficient. We have chosen to run the landfill in a slightly more expensive way for specific reasons. We have a transfer facility, right? We know that that's slightly more expensive than the alternative way that we used to run it. We have chosen to do that for specific reasons, and those reasons are providing excellent outcomes. So they're benefiting users, benefiting ourselves, benefiting the environment. So I would strongly recommend not choosing to do it the cheapest way, but doing it the right way and the best way we can. So
thank you. I'm happy to move from the chair that we adopt option 1. Councillor Courtney, you're happy to second. Any further discussion, debate, questions before I put the resolution? So we're at item 7, resolution 1. It's on the screen, isn't it? You're all clear? All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, resolution is carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the open agenda. Would someone like to move that we move into confidential? Moved Councillor Courtney, seconded Councillor Walker. All of those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, resolution is carried. Begins on page 4 of the confidential section. So just give you a moment all to find that. including myself.